Seltzer Kings.
Podcasts.
This podcast is brought to you by Carvana. Carvana makes car selling fast and easy from start to finish. Enter your license plate or VIN and get a real offer in seconds, down to the penny. If you accept, Carvana will come pick up your car from your driveway. Or you can drop it off at one of our car vending machines. Either way, you get paid instantly. It's fast, transparent, and 100% online. Car selling that saves your time. That's Carvana.
Carvana.
Pickup fees may apply.
Hey friends, this is Audie Cornish, host of CNN This Morning and The Assignment, and guess what? Every story you care about, every angle you want unpacked is now streaming on CNN. That means you can catch my show or other CNN programming whenever you want on your favorite device. And a subscription also gets you access to exclusive video series and unlimited articles. So subscribe to CNN at cnn.com/subscription.
Elections suck, Gavin, but at least we don't have to check with the king to make sure our guy's okay. Ass.
The following podcast contains...
But swearing and using dirty words is not one of my vices. I don't use foul language, and I don't like to hear anyone else use it either.
Explicit language.
Hello and welcome to the podcast that asks a simple question. When you couldn't tell the difference between a pregnant Chad and a dimpled Chad, what the hell were you thinking? This is episode number 513, Ballot with Butterfly Wings edition of the show. It's part one of the 2000 election, the election that broke America. Stay tuned. What the Hell You Think of Podcast is brought to you by Ballot Express for all of your election needs. When it comes to election times, we all know that a good ballot can make all the difference, whether you want a simple outcome or want to confuse as many old people as possible to skew the results in your favor. That's where Ballot Express makes the difference. From dog catcher to national office, Ballot Express can custom design your election instrument for your specific needs. And it's 100% legal. The Supreme Court said so. Don't leave your election up to chance. Get the right ballot for you at Ballots Express.
Welcome to a very special live edition of The Daily Show. It is now official. We can call it at 855 hours and 2 minutes of this election night. The state of Florida and its 25 electoral votes, with 100% of its precincts reporting, will go to George W. Bush. And the crowd loves it. The final margin in the state of Florida, 5 votes to 4 votes. Now, what's interesting about that is it's an 11% victory margin for George W. Bush, a lot greater than most pundits anticipated in what was considered a very tight race. Now, we're still here crunching some numbers. We'll be here all night. But it looks like one of the most surprising things about this Florida vote is that George W. Bush got 100% of the African-American vote. Shocking. Very surprising because traditionally, as you know, that's a Democratic voting bloc. Now, with Florida, George Bush now has 271 electoral votes to Al Gore's 267, meaning that George Walker Bush will take office as this nation's 43rd president of the United States. Actually, if I can, interesting fun fact about the election. Al Gore got 350,000 more votes nationally, so that's kind of funny. And kind of funny. I bet Al Gore get a big kick out of that when he hears it.
People today have either forgotten or never knew just how fucking great it was in the 1990s.
Okay, Grandpa.
After the Cold War ended and America's little victory lap in the Persian Gulf, it was kind of like a little utopian dream. I mean, if you were white.
I think I'm seeing a caveat here.
But within those parameters, it was pretty fucking great. The economy was humming along, unemployment was down, and in general, people were feeling pretty good. We had great music and television, and aside from a few regrettable fashion choices.
My earring, less gold. My Janko jeans, less Jinko jeans. Everything was fantastic. It was so great because, we never really had to think about the government at all. I mean, we all knew who the president was.
He was a saxophone player.
But that was it.
Congress was just a bunch of old white guys in suits that never actually did anything, and the Supreme Court, get the fuck out of here with that. And it was fine because the government just worked without us really needing to pay attention to it. I mean, sure, there was the occasional shutdown, but that was just because the Republicans hated poor people.
Just like now.
They would last a few weeks, then Bill Clinton would make a speech and the GOP would cave in and things went on like normal. You cannot imagine the freedom to literally not give a shit about the government, unless, of course, you were a white supremacist in a mountain hideout or a freak religious cult in a Texas compound. The government was just an invisible machine that ran in the background that you would wind up every couple of years in an election and then ignore it till the next election.
Simpler times.
Most of us didn't even bother to vote. Voting was something our parents did. I mean, yeah, they tried to get us out to vote with their rock the boat bullshit, but we had shit to do, man. Like, have you heard about this internet thing? I hear you could get laid on there. And that isn't even counting for all the other important stuff that was going on, like Lollapalooza and swing dancing. Being able to not worry about the government was what freed us all to concentrate on the things that mattered. I guess people paid more attention back when the Soviet Union was pointing nukes at us, but now Russia was our buddy, and war was unthinkable. The economy booming, everyone had jobs, at least everyone that counted. And there were cool jobs, too, like making websites that sold dog food with a sock puppet or overstock shit. The good times were now, and the government was boring. And that is the way things were, and that is the way they were always going to be. That was until... Well, we went to go wind up the government again in one of those election things, and someone broke the handle and the whole goddamn thing ground to a halt because some old people in Florida couldn't read a goddamn ballot. Which brings me to this week's topic. That time 25 years ago, the week this episode drops, when Florida broke an election, and an election broke America. You know, there's an alternate timeline where Al Gore won that 2000 election and a whole bunch of bad shit didn't happen. Or if it did happen, it happened slightly different and for the better. But he lost, and now we got all this shit to deal with, so now we're going to talk about it. But first...
So go ahead, let me have it.
We got to talk about the Electoral College. Specifically, why we have an Electoral College in the first place.
Slavery.
Actually, yeah. Okay, we're done here. No, I'm kidding. We got a formula, so I got to stick to it. Back when the founders were writing the constitutions, one of the biggest problems they had to overcome was...
The hypocrisy.
No, they were fine with that. The much bigger problem that was they were going to have a president, dude. How do you pick him? And it was definitely only going to be him. The first plan was to simply have Congress vote on it, but it didn't take long for them to figure out that if Congress chose the presidents were going to be beholden to Congress, which kind of nullified this whole check on the power of Congress. So, after much debate, a system was devised where the people would elect the president. Not all the people, mind you.
Not on the whim of the unwashed masses.
But a selection of state delegates would be impaneled by the states using the individual states' preferred methods, and they would cast a vote that elected a new president.
Just seems like a very complicated...
It was, but you need to keep in mind the founders were not doing this to advance the cause of liberty, equality, and fraternity.
Because we're not the French.
They were doing this to preserve their status, position, wealth, and power. And for a little freedom accidentally trickled down to the rabble, well, so long as it wasn't excessive, I guess they thought they could live with it. The system had its flaws. Most notably, it could result in the winner of the popular vote not being the president because of the Electoral College, which happened 4 times so far, 1876, 1888, 2000, and 2016. But this is only because someone decided that the common scum of the nation ought to be allowed to have some say in who leads the nation. This did not happen quickly or easily. It took the 15th Amendment in 1870 to establish that all men had the right to vote, though terms and conditions did apply. See your local Klansman for details. In 1920, the 19th Amendment said, okay, fine, chicks can vote too, so long as they vote the way their husband tells them to. I mean, that wasn't text, but it was definitely in the subtext. In 1924, the U.S. government graciously allowed the Native Americans that we stole America from in the first place to participate in the governing of their stolen land. In 1964, we passed the 24th Amendment saying that we were serious about what we said in the 15th Amendment. And in 65 and 75, we passed the Voting Rights Act, an expansion to say that we were super serious about the 15th and 24th Amendment. In 71, we said, you know what? You're 18. We can draft you and you can die for your country. So yeah, you can vote. We know you won't, so it won't really matter. And of course, starting in 2010, the Supreme Court started finding ways to say, you know what? We weren't actually all that serious about the 15th, the 24th Amendment, and the Voting Rights Act. None of that mattered because constitutionally, all of our voting was masturbatory nonsense because only the Electoral College can elect a president. Which is why a half a dozen middle population swing states are the only states that matter every 4 years when it comes to time to elect the president. Because the bunch of rich white guys really did not want anything to do with people like you or me choosing the president, much less women, Indians, or black people. This is still true today, and that's why we have the Electoral College.
It all makes sense now.
Now to the matter at hand. As I said at the top of the show, during the 90s, Americans had checked out on the whole politics thing, and about the only thing the average American knew, politically speaking, is that Bill Clinton had gotten a Hummer from a White House intern, and they were...
And we're totally cool with it.
Seriously, he had a 73% approval rating during his impeachment hearings. That is unheard of today. And don't think for a second that Trump's political advisors hasn't suggested it to him, but I don't think he can get it up, and also... no one wants to think about Trump getting a blowjob. Of course, Bill Clinton wasn't running for office, but as Veep, Al Gore was. In every respect, Al Gore, former Democratic senator from Tennessee, back when Tennessee elected Democrats, was the platonic ideal of a vice president.
For polling purposes, you're practically a generic white male.
He was a serious, competent, moderately well-known, and not to mention extremely boring. And he was a foregone conclusion for the Democratic nomination and generally considered to be the favorite in the general election. All Al had to do was remind people of the previous 8 years of prosperity and not thinking about the government, and he was good to go. But Al did not do this. Al decided that he wanted to differentiate himself from Bill Clinton, particularly with the blowjob thing, which, again, Americans thought was great. And this turned out to be a bit of a mistake. That and picking a Republican in Democrats' clothes by the name of Joe Lieberman was once very rude to me in a Georgetown Safeway. Yeah, Joe, I knew who you were. On the GOP side, after a primary filled with the usual lunatics, it came down to Senator John McCain, who, despite being an ultra-right-wing conservative, also had integrity and decency, and for the Republican voters, this,
That's a no-go, bro.
And so the governor of Texas, with name recognition and a little outsgoing from him, won the primary. This was, as you know, George W. Bush. W. was the failed son of the oldest child of the Bush family, and like most failed sons of a rich political family, he skated through life without really trying all that hard. He avoided Vietnam by serving in the National Guard, did a lot of booze, developed a drinking problem, did some blow, found a good woman, found Jesus, got clean, and then entered politics. It should be noted that politics was not W.'s first love. That was baseball. He was terrible at baseball, so being a player was out. But since he had money, owning a baseball team was possible, so he bought controlling interest in the Texas Rangers. While W owned the team did not make the playoffs once. But they did get a new stadium on the taxpayers' dime, so, you know.
It's a win-win-win situation.
W ran for governor of Texas, won, and spent several years of mediocrity until it was time to run for president. There's one piece of information that you need to know that's relevant more than anything else about the family dynamic of the Bush family. Poppy Bush never wanted W to be president because W was his fuck-up failed son who was a drunk and a coke hound. Poppy wanted then governor of Florida, and that'll be relevant shortly, Jeb Bush to be president.
I think the next president needs to be a lot quieter, but send a signal that we're prepared to act in the national security interests of this country to get back in the business of creating a more peaceful world. Please clap.
And you all know how that worked out. The 2000 campaign was relatively normal, even boring. How could it not be boring with Al Gore and George W. Bush running? The highlights were some notable SNL impersonations.
In fact, we are almost out of time, so I will instead ask each candidate to sum up in a single word the best argument for his candidacy. Governor Bush?
Strategery.
Vice President Gore?
Lockbox.
The candidates were doing what candidates did in the days before the end of democracy in America. Gore tacked it a little to the right, Bush tacked a little to the left. Policy-wise, these two men were the same sides of a coin, and that coin was a dime. This left space for third-party candidates to come in and play a spoiler, the biggest of which was, of course,
I think I voted for Nader!
Yeah, for the record, I did vote for Nader, and I wasn't even drunk.
Because, he got a chance he can win. White dudes like to do shit like that, vote for the wrong dude as a goof.
I was just becoming the Antifa, commie, pinko libtard I am today, and I wanted to vote in protest of the bad choices in a very safe, politically non-threatening way, so I voted for Nader in Virginia, which went for Bush by over 200,000 plus votes. Everything was running normally. Gore won the usual blue states, Bush won the usual red states, and it all came down to the swing states as always. Gore took the blue wall in the upper Midwest, and by the end of the evening, it all came down to one state, the swingiest state of them all.
I always hated Florida.
Yeah. Florida has always been a problem. While the northern parts of the state are very southern, the southern part of the state is very not. And the middle part of the state is like someone took Long Island and parked it off the coast of Cuba. It's like this because for decades, the Northeast, particularly New York and Massachusetts, have been sending our old people there so they could wait to die. And in return, Florida sent us
cocaine. Glorious cocaine.
It has always been one of the swingiest states in presidential elections in the country, going from red and blue and back to red, like a meth head jerking off while doing autoerotic asphyxiation. The rural north goes red, the urban south goes blue, and the center of the state goes whichever way the wind blows. Most infuriatingly, the vote is rarely that close. It's usually several million votes that determine the winner of the state's significant electoral vote total. It's currently 30, but in 2000, it was 25 electoral votes. Bush and Gore both needed to win Florida because the polls were tight. From the New York Times, quote, in Florida and Wisconsin, the margin was 1 percentage point. In Pennsylvania, it was 2. It was dead even in New Mexico and Tennessee. Each candidate has far more votes in the strongest states that he needs to win the electoral votes in those states. For example, Bush leads by daunting margins in Texas, while Gore has a more impressive score in New York, unquote. So, on November 7th, 2000, 25 years ago, the week this episode drops, Americans went to the polls. And as the returns began to come in that evening, it was clear that Gore was going to win the popular vote.
That don't mean shit.
But the electoral vote was so close. Bush had 246 electoral votes locked up. Gore had 236. When it came down to Florida to take the winner to 270. At 7:57 Eastern Time, CNN called it.
A big call to make. CNN announces that we call Florida in the Al Gore column. This is a state both campaigns desperately wanted to win.
And then, at 9:54 p.m., same date.
Stand by. CNN right now is moving our earlier declaration of Florida back to the too close to call column. 25 very big electoral votes in the home state of the governor's brother, Jeb Bush, are hanging in the balance.
You see, what had happened was, well, I'll let NPR give you the nut graph on that. Quote, after calling the race, the networks began getting phone calls from Republicans. One of them came from the campaign of the Republican nominee, George W. Bush, the then governor of Texas, Bush's chief strategist, Karl Rove, who phoned Fox News to insist that Florida was still in play. He shared his displeasure with someone who was likely to offer a sympathetic ear, John Ellis, a Fox analyst and member of the extended Bush family. Soon, the on-air personalities on Fox were telling viewers to reserve judgment on Florida. Before long, the other networks were hearing the objections and reaching the same conclusion, unquote. You see, networks call the winners not just based on the number of votes reported, but by the number of votes yet to be counted, where those votes are located, the demographic of the people voting, and their voting history of those locations, and by exit polling. Exit polling is when some schmuck with a clipboard runs up to you as you walk out of the polling place, starts just hammering you with questions like, who did you vote for, or
what is the airspeed velocity of an unladen swallow?
And then flies off a bridge into the fog. Back at the network, they take all these numbers, punch them into the big Votomatic polling prognosticator, and the machine spits out a punch card with the winner of the election.
Apply hazy. Try again.
Well, that's what the networks should have said. But instead, they thought they knew best and told the American public that Al Gore had won. Only to eat shit 2 hours later in the most embarrassing way possible. More from NPR. Quote, Andrew Cuomo, the director of the Pew Research Center, was to hold off calling Florida. Cuomo thought that the first wave of exit polls leaned too much on what appeared to be oversampling of demographic groups inclined to vote Democratic. That could skew towards an unusual number of young voters, women voters, and people of color. More than a few news organizations reached the same conclusion. However, Cuomo noted that it might also mean that a disproportionate number of these Democratic-leaning groups were voting early, or that a disproportionate number of them were being represented in the exit polls. Unquote. Things rapidly descended into chaos and confusion. From the Miller Center, quote, at 10 p.m. Eastern Time, CNN and CBS rescinded their early call of Florida, and at about 2:15 a.m., the networks revised their call of the race in Florida in favor of Bush. Shortly after the Florida switch, Gore phoned Bush to concede. Gore had about 15 minutes to address his supporters before Bush would speak to the crowd, waiting outside the state capitol in Austin, Texas. The allotted time passed without a concession speech from Gore. Bush's brother, the Governor Jeb Bush of Florida, checked the networks to find that the margin of Florida was narrowing once again. Subsequently, Bush spoke with Gore again via phone, and in a terse conversation, Gore told Bush that he was retracting his concession as the numbers in Florida kept changing. Man, that must have been a great fucking phone call to listen into. President W speaking. George, hello, it's me, Al Gore, Vice President of the United States. I've been running against you for president for several months now. Yeah, you lost. You already told me. Well, yes, I did call to concede and congratulate you, but you see, now I'm taking that concession and congratulations and putting it in a lockbox. Hey, what, you can't unconcede. Laura, he says he's unconceded. Get a dick in here. Sorry, George, but there are irregularities that need to be examined, so I am unconceding. But I'm the decider. I decide that you can't. I'm sorry that you feel that way, George. Anyway, I've got to go and tell the people that it's now going to take weeks of lawsuits to figure this out. But hey, I hope you enjoy your night. I just want you to know that while that W impression was shit, that Al Gore was spot the fuck on. In the early days of the Republic's limitations in technology necessarily meant the results of election couldn't be known for weeks, which is why the process today is so spread out over weeks after Election Day. With the advent of the telegraph, the speed in which the results were compiled increased. From the conversation, quote, in 1892, the New York Herald and the New York World newspapers, as well as the Chicago Herald, used a variety of lighting techniques to signify the state of national results in incumbent President Benjamin Harrison's race against former President Grover Cleveland, unquote. Radio created the modern election night coverage, which we are used to today. More from the conversation, quote, in 1920, newspapers in Detroit and Pittsburgh, as well as other locations, took to the radio airwaves to announce Warren Harding's election as president. By 1932, the radio networks relayed Franklin Delano Roosevelt's victory over incumbent Herbert Hoover to more than 60% of American households that had radios, unquote. Television picked up and the news got faster. In 1952, CBS used a UNIVAC computer to tabulate and prognosticate the results of the election, and it worked so well that the news anchors refused to believe it when it said that Eisenhower had won.
There are certain things men must do to remain men. Your computer would take that away.
By and large, for a century, Americans had gone to bed on election night knowing who would be the next president. As November 7th turned into November 8th, 2000, the networks were paralyzed. Those who had made the call had retracted them, and those who didn't dared not to make a prediction, so they signed off in the wee hours of the morning, and Americans woke up the next day not knowing who had won. From Today.com, quote, Today anchor Katie Couric's first words said it all on the morning of November 8, 2000, when she opened the show on the day after the presidential election saying, "Good morning, we do not have a winner," unquote. Of course, we still had a president. Bill Clinton had another 3 months in office. We just didn't know which dude would be moving in after Bill moved out. And for the average American, this didn't mean much, but it drove the news media fucking nuts.
NBC News election headquarters in New York. This is NBC Nightly News with Tom Brokaw.
Good evening. Yes, we're still here, and it's still too close to call. A determined Vice President Al Gore continues to hold a lead in both the national popular vote and in the Electoral College, but Texas Governor George W. Bush remains confident he'll win the state of Florida after a recount, and that will put him over the top in the Electoral College, making him the president-elect. Here are the numbers. First, the national popular vote, with Al Gore holding a steady lead over Governor Bush. In the electoral map, Governor Bush with victories in 29 states for a total of 246 electoral votes. Vice President Gore, 19 states and the District of Columbia for 260 electoral votes. But the big prize still to be claimed, Florida, 25 electoral votes. This is a Florida ballot that is being recounted tonight, and the confusing lineup of candidates may have led to still more problems in that state.
Vote totals this close were always going to trigger a recount in Florida. There were only a few hundred votes between them. So Florida began a statewide recount, and that wasn't a big deal. These things are not uncommon. As the recount commenced, legions of lawyers from both campaigns began descending on Florida like sharks around a fat man on a slowly deflating pool float. There were several issues. The absentee ballots that were outstanding, would they be counted if they arrived after the deadline beyond Election Day? And since they were military ballots, it was assumed that they would skew heavily towards Bush. But the far bigger issue was in Palm Beach County, where Gore was expected to be the winner, but the vote totals were strange. In fact, the vote totals reported didn't make much sense at all. Pat Buchanan, a perennial also-ran in those days, had significantly larger vote totals than was expected in a heavily Democratic county because Buchanan was a right-wing lunatic. Also, because there were a lot of so-called undervotes, ballots rejected by the machine counting them as unreadable, and it didn't take long to discover what the problem was.
In the fall of 2000, the supervisor of elections for Palm Beach County, Florida, was tasked with designing a ballot with more candidates than could fit on a single column. It wound up looking like this. It was called a butterfly ballot because of the way the text occupied 2 columns. If you were voting for Bush, the form made enough sense. To pick the first candidate, you punched in the first bubble. But then to vote for the second candidate on the list, Al Gore, you had to punch in the third bubble. See the problem? The Palm Beach Post estimated that over 2,800 Gore voters accidentally voted for Pat Buchanan.
A number of voters here in Palm Beach County have filed lawsuits asking for a new election because they claim that they either voted for the wrong candidate or double-punched their ballots because of confusion over the ballot design.
Bush won Florida by a margin of 537 votes. Better typography here arguably could have changed U.S. history.
It would take a massive effort to hand count hundreds of thousands of ballots, some of which the intention of the voter was not at all clear, meaning a judgment call had to be made by those counting the ballot, and all of this added up to 2 things. It was going to take a long time, and there were going to be a shitload of lawsuits. And all the lawyers are sitting back going,
girlfriend's gonna get paid.
And it is with the long fight in Florida that we will pick up next week for part 2 of the election of 2000.
Getting ready to step into your career era? Set yourself apart with Adobe Creative Cloud Pro for students. Hone your skills with apps like Photoshop, Illustrator, Premiere Pro, and more, powered with the latest in creative AI. Students save over 55% so you can build a portfolio you're proud of. Launch your future with Adobe Creative Cloud Pro for students. Visit adobe.com/students to learn more.
This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever find yourself playing the budgeting game? Well, with the Name Your Price tool from Progressive, you can find options that fit your budget and potentially lower your bills. Try it at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law. Not available in all states.
That is it for the show this week. 25 years ago. Seems like yesterday. Which is odd since every day since the beginning of 2025 has been 14 and a half years long. This election pulled back the curtain on American politics to reveal not some dark, sinister figures running all the things behind the scene, but a drunk monkey pulling on his pod. Politics has never really been the same since. God, God, I never really thought I would miss George W. Bush. Speaking of the things that you thought you would never miss, rate and review this show so others can find us. Take a listen. And I don't know, wish they'd missed it. Kick us $1 at patreon.com/whatthehellpodcast. We use that money to pay for lawyers to contest our continuing losses of the Webby Awards for Best Comedy Podcast. Do all the things Jeremy tells you to do in the closing credits. Otherwise, he will stop submitting us for the Webby Awards. And so for me, Dave, in spite of my rage, Bledsoe, producer,
He's just a drunk rat in a cage.
Gavin, and all the fictional voters on this show, we want to say, yes, you can fake it for just one more show. We do it every goddamn week. And we'll see you all next week.
I'm still just a rat in a cage. Despite all my rage, I am still just a rat in a cage. And someone will say what is lost can never be saved. Despite all my rage, I am still just a rat in a cage.
What the Hell Were You Thinking stars Dave Bledsoe and features Gavin St. James and several fictional minions. The show is produced by Kimberly Steele and a part of the Seltzer Kings podcast network. You can find more information on the show on their website, whatthehellpodcast.com, or on Facebook as What the Hell Podcast. Thanks for listening.
I have no ending for this, so I take a small bow.
Call my lawyers.
Seltzer Kings.
Podcasts.